So it's 10 o'clock now, I think. So we'll get underway. Welcome. This course is meant just for people from Pakenham and anybody else who wants to log on from the Emerald course as well. We're only expecting a few people for this course today. It's great to have the two of you here, and hopefully one or two or three others will join us as we move along. Before we go any further, I would like to just do an acknowledgement of country and acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land. And I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present today. So my name is Jeff Barlow. I'm the president of Healesville CORE, CORE standing for Community Renewable Energy. And I was, until the end of August, the executive officer of the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. And Glen Morris is our keynote speaker for today. And Tom, as I mentioned earlier, is in the background handling our IT work. I first met Glen back in, I think, 2017, when we were looking for, the Healesville CORE was set up in that year, and we were looking for someone to provide some information to our local community on all things technical to do with renewable energy on the domestic front. And Glen, as he will explain to you, comes from a background where he's had a lot of experience in renewable energy and is actively engaged in that work on a daily basis. And Glen has been actually responsible for many of our technical presentations in Healesville. We've been very grateful to have him on board. So Glen was an obvious choice for us for this particular program. We had hoped that Glen would be second speaker, and that we would have Dr. Morag Mackay starting off talking about community renewable energy in general, and all the dynamics associated with that. But unfortunately, due to dates, we needed to start with Glen, and Morag will come in second. So it's a little bit out of sequence, but I think it should work quite well. It did on Wednesday with the Emerald group. So if I explain a little bit about Healesville CORE, Healesville Community Renewable Energy is a not-for-profit group. I'm the president of that group. I initiated the development of the group back in 2017. We got a steering committee together of about a dozen to 14 people, and I presented my ideas, my vision to them. They thought it was a good idea. And we then worked towards setting up a public meeting in Healesville in our town hall. And we got about 230 people along to that, which was really fantastic and a good start. And we became incorporated that year, and we have been running events for the community and organising things for the community, and trying to provide some leadership in the field of community renewable energy for the Healesville and surrounding towns. We've run things like, as I alluded to earlier, events with speakers like Glen and many others, talking on the technical side, helping people to understand solar panels and batteries and how they work and how they can save you money, how they can save the environment as we move in this revolution that we're currently in towards renewable energy. Information about heat pumps and reverse cycle air conditioners and going all electric in the home and why one might do that. And we've had a whole range of other speakers as well. And then the other side of it is that we have run community offers. So not just giving people information, but also providing the opportunity. So we go out and talk to companies, and we find somebody who would be willing to offer solar panels and batteries to the community. Another company is willing to offer heat pumps to the community, reverse cycle air conditioners. And we also decided that we would run a training program, and Glen was involved in the first one that we ran, to train volunteers in home energy efficiency. So members of our community contact us and say, look, we'd like someone to help us understand what we're doing in our household regarding energy wastage and what we might be able to do to economize and become more efficient. And we have volunteers who are trained now to go out and do that. And I think we have had something like 28 or 29 local houses visited, and the responses from everybody is very positive. In addition to that, we also managed to apply to Tony Smith, our local member of parliament, who's now retired. He was in the previous federal government, and he made $90,000 available to us for 3 community energy projects: the Hillsville Living and Learning Centre, the Robin Jane Children's Centre, and the local Catholic primary school. And we put solar panels on their rooftops over a 2-year period. And we're saving them well over $1 million through the lifetime of those systems, as they produce more of their own energy rather than simply getting it from the grid. What we also did in relation to those systems was we used our ingenuity, and rather than just giving them money as a grant to purchase those systems, we actually set up a renewable fund, and we gave them the money free of interest. They pay it back from the savings that they make on their energy bills over a 4 to 7 year period, depending on what their consumption is. And that money goes back into the pudding bowl, and we then disperse that to other groups in the community as well. So it's a proverbial magic pudding of Commonwealth government taxpayers' money, which we can then recirculate within the community, which we're very pleased about. We also applied to the local council to get funding from them to manage our administrative costs and so on. And we applied last year to the state government for one of 7 grants that were available to set up community hubs throughout Victoria. And they provided a grant of just under $500,000 for each of those hubs. And Hillsville Core was very fortunate to be able to get one of those. And it was just a 1-year contract, and we finished that in July, August this year. And as I mentioned earlier, I was the executive officer, and we employed 3 other people part-time, and we worked to support other community energy groups in our region to provide them with capacity building and some funding, and ran events for them, and etc. So it was a great support for the groups in that area, and we were sorry to see that no funding was forthcoming after that, but hopefully in the not too distant future, either the Victorian government or the federal government will begin to see the value of community hubs being spread all around Australia. I would like to thank the Emerald Community House and Pakenham Living and Learning for hosting this program for us. They've been very actively involved right from the beginning. The idea of running the program was mine. I'm an educator, I'm a teacher over 40, 50 years experience, and I'm passionate about adult education and how educating people can lead to the transformation of individual lives and the community generally, and our country as a whole. So I'm passionate about the value of education. And we developed this particular course because there was nothing really available to help people understand what community energy is all about. And it's something that a lot of people we find would like to get involved in different towns around Victoria. And at last count, there were well over 100 community energy groups around Australia, all providing some sort of leadership for their local communities. We're hoping that what we'll achieve out of this course is people who are much more informed about community renewable energy, and also that some people may actually want to set up some groups in their local areas as well. And of course, Hillsville Core will be very happy to support you with knowledge and information once this program is finished, and to help you get off the ground if you need that. So the program's organised with Glen Morris, as we've said, as our initial speaker. We'll follow up with Dr. Morag Mackay next time, next Saturday, and she will be talking about community renewable energy in general, nationally and internationally, and what these sorts of organisations can achieve. She'll be followed by Lucinda Flynn. Lucinda is an expert in home energy efficiency. She works in that field professionally, and she also helped us establish a training course for our volunteers. This was in addition to the one that Glen ran earlier, which was our trial program. Lucinda set up a program with us through the Box Hill Institute, and we trained over 20 people in that program. And that course then was extended. Other hubs got interested in it, and they took it up. I think there was one in northeastern Victoria and one in Gippsland as well. So there's I think well over 50 or 60 people now who have been introduced to that sort of home energy efficiency idea, concept. And of course, our last session is a field day, a site visit up to Glen's lab up on Mount Tullibawong, and also up to the Yarra Valley Water Wandon water treatment plant, which is run on solar energy. So that should be quite an exciting adventure as well. So I think that's enough for me to say in introduction, and what I'd like to do is to hand you over to Glen, who, as I said, is a wealth of information, and will be able to help you to understand all things to do with the technical side of community renewable energy. Over to you, Glen.
Thank you, Jeff. You know, sometimes it's nice to put things into a really short kind of phrase, and I thought they often call it the elevator pitch. So if you're stuck in an elevator, Jeff, with someone and they say, what's community renewable energy? How would you pitch that to someone?
I would say that it's about volunteers in the community who are passionate about the transition to renewable energy and doing something about climate change, providing some leadership for the local community. Because when you think about it, things don't get done unless there's some leadership, whether it's a football club, a cricket club, or a drama group or community renewable energy group. You need some sort of leadership. And I think that's what this is all about. And I've seen that as my function as president of Hillsville Core since 2017. And I think there's another important element for me in it, is that it's not just about transitioning to renewable energy. It's about building links within the community. It's about helping people to feel as though they can be empowered to actually do something. And this came out of, this idea came out of the frustration and anger that I felt when our Commonwealth government was doing practically nothing for renewable energy, practically nothing for climate change. And we're getting all of these anti-climate voices speaking up. And it was really difficult actually to talk publicly about climate change because of all the negativity that was out there. And I was so frustrated and angry about that I thought, well, we've got to do something with that emotion, and it's good to put it into some sort of framework and to provide a positive direction for the community utilising all that energy. That has since transformed for me and for many others in our group, and we really feel now that we're operating from an emotion of love and affection for the community, and driven by inspiring feelings of achievement and empowerment, which we share with others in the community and that they share with us as well. So that might be a bit too long as an elevator pitch. I think we've probably gone up and down a few times, but I think that'll do for now.
Ding! I think that's my floor.
Okay, over to you, Glen.
Thank you, Jeff. I think you just pressed the emergency button in the elevator then, but Look, really appreciate what you've done, Jeff, in our local community through Hillsville Core, but also for reaching out to all the other community organisations. So well done. It's been a great contribution. And turning, as you said, anger into action. It's great to hear that people are feeling a bit better about talking about climate change now at last. It's not a verboten subject. So, welcome everyone. As Jeff said, I'm Glen Morris. I'm actually coming to you from Murumura Community Cooperative in the Yarra Valley on top of Mount Turlibuong. So I look out, over a few hills towards Pakenham. It's a bit of a reach, but it's out there somewhere. And I've got a couple of presentations, but really my style is very interactive. Now we're a tiny group, so I really encourage you to interrupt me, ask questions. You can do it live through voice. You can type it into the meeting chat. If you're familiar with Zoom, down the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon that's got like a bubble, a speech bubble. That's the chat icon. That's a good place. I've already put a couple of links in there, which I'll refer to in a bit. And others can share content into that chat as well. So this is a Zoom meeting. That means we're all equal. It's not like a webinar where you just have to sit there and listen and hope there's a Q&A at the end. So be ready to ask questions. So just going to start my prezo. So let me just launch that. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you can see a picture of a beautiful mountain. Thank you, Rachel. That's great. It's always good to know it's actually working. So that's where I live, on top of Mount Turlibuong, and it's also where I run the Smart Energy Lab, which is my business, which is involved in testing of renewable energy products, sort of field testing them, also running training courses, and technical evaluations. A lot of companies send me products, inverters, batteries, smart energy systems to assess them. Because my background is in the electronics field. I'm part of the EL42 Committee on Standards Australia, so I help write the renewable energy standards. So that's kind of where I come from. But that picture there is actually of my community, or part of it. We're 70 people, approximately 30 homes on top of Mount Turlibuong. What you're looking at there is my cluster, one of the 6 clusters of houses. And to bring it straight into community energy, we actually have been off-grid since 1974. Most houses up until probably only about 8 years ago were all mostly individual power systems. So one house, one power system. But I've recently built a microgrid. So what you're looking at there in this picture, all those houses are actually interconnected through a microgrid system. They have their own independent solar and battery, but they connect as you would in suburbia to the poles and wires in the street. In our case, underground, and that means we can share energy between houses. Someone might have surplus, someone might have deficit, and the microgrid with its own dedicated storage and solar tracking system is able to soak up the surplus and provide some of the deficit. You might look in the bottom right-hand corner. This picture's a bit old. We were just constructing the solar farm at that stage there. It's probably the smallest solar farm in inverted commas in Australia. It's only 2 35 kilowatt trackers, but they look pretty impressive. And they mean that we have a lot of renewable energy when the sun shines. This is kind of one of our challenges, being in Melbourne, I suppose, in wintertime, can be quite dim for long periods of time. It has enabled us, though, to start the move towards electrification of our transport systems. So currently we have 7 electric vehicles here. 4 of them are full EVs and 3 are plug-in hybrids. And this sort of seems to be happening every, few months. Someone transitions to an electric vehicle. So we've got electric vehicle charging stations here. In fact, we have the only fast charger in the region. I think the closest one is in Melbourne, out of sort of near Melbourne somewhere. There's a fast charger. So it's kind of ironic. Off-grid, we have a way of charging electric vehicles at 50 kilowatts, so it's pretty cool. We also have food systems. Probably can see a little bit of veggie garden at the bottom there. That's a community food garden. And we are what's known as an intentional community. That means we own the property together as a cooperative, and we intend to live together, and we manage it collectively, and also all our kind of relationships as well with each other. So it's kind of the challenge of living in community. Bit of a transition here. You're supposed to do some self-directed learning, and you probably received an email with a bunch of links that I put in there, including some to my YouTube channel. So this is my professional channel, Smart Energy Lab. If you're into tech, there's a lot of tech here. So I'll be talking about products in the renewable energy and smart energy space. So there's a lot of product content there. Often it does sort of dip into rather geeky technical stuff. So, it's horses for courses. But I have another channel, which I've also put in the chat, which is did I jump over it? Hang on. Got too many clicks going on here. Is my Everything Off Grid channel. So this channel is all about living off grid. It's about the people, some of the experiences, and I was recently at the Off Grid Living Festival. So there's quite a lot of interviews with people from stall holders from the Off Grid Living Festival. I have a kind of fun thing I do, which is I'm not doing it at the moment, but I've had a show almost all the way through COVID on Sundays called Toolbox Tech Talk, and I dress up as a kind of badass rapper and talk tech, interview guests on my show. So that's one of the things I do a little bit as well. And click again. There we go. So let's start with kind of the personal. Really, community energy involves the individual as well as the community. And so I'm going to start with the individual and looking at things that you can do to help save money, produce clean energy, maybe be more self-reliant. And it's really asking that question, why would you want to, say, for instance, install solar power and batteries? People often gravitate to those solutions when they're thinking about choices they have for saving money, etc. Now, the reason I've put those 3 bullet points there is you need to be clear about your objectives. And I'll point out, for instance, that it's not always the cheapest way to save money. In fact, it's not. There are much cheaper ways to save money than installing solar power and batteries. You may want to use more clean energy. You don't actually have to produce your own clean energy. You can buy accredited green energy power from retailers, and that means you are contributing in the pool of energy to the consumption of renewable energy. You might want to be more self-reliant. Now, what does that mean? It means different things to different people. Often it means that you have a certain level of electrical independence. That means if the power goes off in your street, you might still be able to run some appliances in your home. Or it might be a sense that your energy is used by you. Your renewable energy is being primarily used by you. So be clear about what your objectives are before you make those choices. So remember, you're welcome to interrupt me at any time. I just see we've got John join us. Welcome, John, and ask any questions at all. So you can do that in the chat, or you can just chime in, unmute yourself, say, put your hand up, whatever. I'm happy to be interrupted. I love it. So what about reducing the cost of electricity? Now, there's a lot of anxiety about increased power prices. They generally have just gone up. That's kind of the way it's happened, certainly in the last decade or two, as we sort of transition from old tech, new tech, and all sorts of mixed government messaging, which has kind of made it difficult for big generators to plan. So how do we reduce our cost of electricity? Now, I've done this kind of an order of easy to hard, and easiest one actually is to renegotiate your electricity contract. Now, that's often just a phone call, find out a better deal, and switch to another retailer. Now, there's a thing called the loyalty tax. I think Alan Pearce coined that phrase, which means if you stay with the same electricity retailer, you'll be punished by higher prices. They get you to churn, i.e. change retailers, by offering you a sweet deal. It's introductory pricing, basically. But that usually fades away after 1 year, and you automatically fall back onto the default rate, which is always higher. So shop around. Where do you shop around? Well, there are some government websites like the one from Victoria, compare.switched on. There are also commercial services that do this, particularly if you're a big energy user who put in monitoring equipment, and it will actually report to you based on your actual energy usage patterns the best retail pricing there is on the market. Now, there's something like nationally over 2,000 different retail plans. It's insane. Even within one retailer, there'll be loads of different plans. So finding the best one for the way that you use energy is pretty important. Sometimes they'll also try to hook you with, oh, we're going to offer you a feed-in tariff, and it's really nice. You're getting a bit of extra for that solar that you export, but beware that often it comes with a hook, which is higher consumption pricing or connection fees. So, yeah, it's a very complicated area, and that's why services that do the analysis for you are pretty useful. So every year, like you change the batteries in your smoke alarm, change your electricity retailer. Now, the second easiest thing to do is actually make sure that whenever you replace an appliance or choose an appliance, that you've considered its energy efficiency. It is actually one of the best ways, particularly for large energy using appliances, things like white goods. So fridges, freezers, dishwashers, clothes washers, things that you use almost every day and use significant amounts of energy. Just getting a more efficient version will save you money very quickly. The total cost of ownership versus, the purchase price might be higher, but the electrical savings over a relatively short period will mean that you'll be ahead financially. So that's a pretty good one. I see Jeff's just popped something in the chat for everyone there. So the Victorian government will pay you $250 just to compare your bill with others via their website. And you don't have to change your retailer to get the money. Wow, that's a free $250, which is a very strong messaging. It's really strong messaging from the Victorian government that the loyalty tax exists. You should think about changing regularly. So just like your smoke alarm batteries. The energy rating website I also put into that self-directed learning package. It's actually a really useful place to sort on efficiency groups of products. Now, for instance, if you've got a fridge that's getting a bit old. Now, fridges are probably one of my favorite appliances to look at when you're looking at energy efficiency, because it's the one appliance that after you purchase it, you probably never turn it off. Even if you go on holiday, you don't empty your fridge out. Well, I don't think many people would, because you've got so many perishables in there, you just leave it on. So it's a permanently on appliance, and therefore small gains in efficiency will be magnified over time dramatically. So the website for energyrating.gov.au is actually a combined website with the New Zealand government. They also utilise the service. I'm just going to show it to you, actually. So I'm just going to drop out of that share and show you that website. So, like I said, excellent place to go if you're looking for rating of appliances. A little bit hidden is what's called the registration database. Apparently, it says at the top here, currently redeveloping a website, so it could move again. But the registration database, I'm sort of highlighting it with my pointer down here in the bottom right-hand corner. If you click on that, you can type in here and choose groups of products. Now, look at how many things are rated. Anything that's rated under the Mandatory Energy Performance Scheme, the MEP scheme, will be listed on here, including products that have since left the market. So historical products are on there. So let's go to refrigerators and freezers, for instance. We're going to search refrigerators and freezers, and you can do an advanced search, which you might want to choose a particular feature. So you might want to go by total volume, and you might want to choose is sort of between a certain size. So you know that you might typically want something in the 400 to 500 litre range, because that's what you've been used to. So you're going to search for the 400 to 500 litre range. There it is. And you can sort by column. So here we'll sort by star rating, and a 7-star Hisense fridge consumes on average in kilowatt hours 187. Now, what does that mean? Well, just look what the next one is. The next one is massively more, and it's a 6-star. By the time you get down to what you thought was a good thing, the humble 5 stars, they're almost double. So a 5-star fridge, 286 kilowatt hours per year down here, versus a 7-star fridge at the top, 187. Not double, but a very significant saving. So that's a great website for comparing products, and they give you the model number, as you can see, and that can be useful for going searching and replacing it. And the other thing I say about fridges is people often keep them too long. If you've got a fridge from the 90s, you've probably kept it too long because there's been technology changes which have made them more efficient, from reciprocating compressors to screw compressors to inverter-driven compressors. The fridge seals eventually start to fail. And so things like your cold air is actually draining out the bottom of your seals. If you get a little incense stick and hold it at the bottom of your fridge and you can see the incense smoke whooshing away, you know you've got a leaking seal. Also, the refrigerant itself can leak over time from the compressor, and so the compressor's working harder and longer to do the same job. All of that means it's probably time to get that recycled. Now, there are various organisations that take fridges and will appropriately dispose of them, make sure they're being degassed, etc. Okay, I'll just go back to my presentation. Go. So that's energy efficiency in a nutshell. It's not very exciting for, like no one notices that you're doing the right thing with energy efficiency except you and the bill that you pay and the climate that you're affecting, because you're actually effectively emitting less greenhouse gases through more efficient appliances. Number 3, really obvious thing is just use less. Look at ways of turning stuff off. Now, it seems obvious, but some appliances are actually sort of hidden and they're on all the time. Things like plug packs that you leave plugged in, say your mobile phone charger or a desk lamp that's got a plug pack. You might have turned off the desk lamp, but if that plug pack's still warm, it's actually using power. So, you can just use your hand and find out warm things are using power. But then again, other appliances are difficult to turn off because you can't get to the switch. Commonly the entertainment console at home, where you've got to sort of dive down the back of your TV to get to the power switch on the wall. There are very simple devices which are like an extended switch on an extension cord, or even just a power board that you can reach with a switch on it. And some of them also have sensors. Under the Victorian Energy Efficiency scheme, they were rolling out these sensor boards where they put a little infrared sensor on your TV, for instance, pointing towards where you sit, and if you didn't move for too long, it would turn off your TV. So if you go to sleep or something, or you weren't in the room. Now, number 4 on my list, now you see it's right down the list, is actually installing photovoltaic panels or solar hot water systems or heat pumps for heating water. Now, the reason it's number 4 is it is actually an upfront cost compared to the other things which you might have to do anyway, but you choose to be active in your generation of renewable energy. Now, we've been very fortunate in Australia with our incentive programs from federal government. You could say they've kind of been accidental ones. I don't know if they really were that behind them, but we actually have had the small-scale renewable energy scheme for like 20 years, and that has really driven down the cost of solar. We've got the highest per capita in the world adoption of solar on rooftop domestic systems. There's 3 million homes now with rooftop solar in Australia. We're actually running out of freestanding roofs. There's only about 6 million freestanding homes. So that's interesting. The options for solar hot water and or heat pump hot water heating, really, they're a big energy user in a home, and that's an area that you should target for more renewable energy content directly. So systems like heat pumps, if you're not familiar with them, are a device that harvests low-grade energy from the atmosphere, which is actually effectively a solar energy sourcing device. So it's taking that warm or even relatively cold air, like 5-degree air, using a very small amount of electricity, typically a third or less of a conventional water heater, and converting that to a higher temperature through refrigeration cycle. It's exactly the same principle as your reverse cycle air conditioners that can heat in winter and cool in summer. It's just changing the direction of the flow of the refrigerant reverses the function of the device. Lastly, and somewhat questionably, installing batteries. You might think, well, surely if I've got lots of solar panels already, or solar power already on my home, and I'm exporting it because I'm not home during the day, a battery is going to mean I can capture that and save money. Well, the question is, or the comment is really that a battery doesn't generate any energy, it stores it. So you've got an upfront cost for a storage device, and how long that device will take to replace or reduce your cost of electricity compared to its purchase price is pretty long, typically about the same as the warranty on the battery. So at the moment, and I'm sure this will change as prices keep going down, it's probably not a cost-effective solution for most people. But you may choose battery storage for other reasons, and I'll get onto that in a bit. So back on the hot water front, I just wanted to point out that you may already own an enormous battery that you didn't even realize. It's called your resistive element hot water service. If you look at the pie chart there on the right, you'll see that about 40% of energy use in an Australian home, I think this might be Victorian stats actually, is heating and cooling, and about 25% is heating water. So there's an awful lot of energy in the heating space, excuse the pun, and that's a good place to target for displacement with renewable energy. Now, if you've got solar and you've got surplus solar, that could just be a fact that you're not home when the sun's producing lots of renewable energy. Diverting that into your hot water service as an electrical heater is actually a very effective way of turning your hot water tank into a battery. I just point out that a domestic hot water service typically using somewhere between 6 and 14 kilowatt hours a day. That would, to buy a battery to do the same job, would cost you $5,000 to $10,000, and you've already got it. You do need a little piece of equipment called a diverter, something that can typically cost $1,000 or so, but they will divert surplus solar into your hot water service. It only works with resistive element, by the way, not with heat pumps. So that's an option. Is my roof suitable for solar? Now, I get this question a lot. I used to install solar. These days, I just do more consultancy. But customers will go, oh, my roof's got shade or it's facing the wrong way. How do I know if it's suitable? Well, it's not as simple as it might seem. The principle you might think is that if your roof or the area that you're going to put the solar panels on faces north, that's a good place to put them. Well, yes, that is true if you're trying to produce the maximum amount of renewable energy. But it doesn't mean you get to use it, because unless you have battery storage, as I mentioned, it's not necessarily cost effective yet, that energy often flows back out to the grid if you're not using it. So if you're a customer who's not home during the day or doesn't have appliances that they can schedule to come on during the day, you're going to basically be exporting lots of energy to the grid. Very, very little return on that exported energy. There's not a lot of incentive for exporting anymore. And as a result, you're sort of missing out on the cost savings of your solar. But if you've got a orientation that's a bit more east or west or both, which is probably more likely to suit someone who's home in the morning and the afternoon or late afternoons, then that will actually give you a better self-consumption ratio. So just consider that. The other thing is, what about the sort of roof you have and where it's orientated? I just wanted to point out that if you're considering, say, for instance, Melbourne, annual average production of a roof, well, it's not actually production, but the amount of solar energy per square metre for a north-facing 30-degree pitched roof is 4.67 peak sun hours. So basically energy intensity falling on that surface averaged over the year. It'll be more in summer, about 6.7 in summer, and in winter less, around 2.9, but on average 4.67. What about south? Now you might straight away go, south, no good, south's just a waste of time. Actually, on annual average, it's 75% as good as north. Now don't get hung up about how good it is, just think about the savings. If you're worried about the performance of your surface of your roof, just think about where you live in Australia. A south-facing roof in Brisbane is better than a north-facing roof in Melbourne. So, maybe you should move north if you're worried about production. But all surfaces can be useful for producing renewable energy, but there are some caveats. For instance, shading. And we'll talk about solutions to shading and optimizing a design for maximizing self-use. Feel free to interrupt me, guys. You're all very quiet out there. No, I've only had Jeff ask a question in the chat, so I really thrive on interaction with my audience, so feel free to throw a few questions at me. That's a pregnant pause. Also, I didn't mention at the beginning, we're going to have a 5-minute break at about the halfway mark, just so we can have a comfort stop. It's one of the benefits of this kind of presentation via Zoom is you're not in a hall where trying to get everyone in and out of the hall for 5-minute break is a bit impractical. You can just blank your screen and go and get a glass of water or a cup of chai tea, as I am. Okay, so what about how big a system do I need? Now, this almost seems contradictory, but people often say, what's the right size solar power system for my energy usage pattern? They might be, have looked at their electricity bill, for instance, and it says that they use 20 kilowatt hours per day on average. Maybe it's a bit more in winter or a bit more in summer, depending on the mix of energy, whether you've got gas or not. But it's actually, from a financial point of view, often more sensible to have more solar than you need. Now, how can that be? Well, it's the peculiarity of how our incentive schemes work. Under the small scale renewable energy scheme, which has been running for like 20 years, it rolls out to 2030, by the way, so it will eventually finish. You only get a rebate. Well, to be specific, it generates renewable energy certificates, which are a tradable commodity, and those are usually offered as a point of sale discount by your solar installer or your solar retailer. Those certificates are only on panels, and for about the last decade, the certificates have been worth more than the panels. So you actually got a perverse kind of incentive to stay the right sized. You really want to maximize the amount of solar you can get onto your roof to keep the costs down. That's kind of a good problem to have. And if you look at the stats here, the average system size, over the last 11 years has gone from roughly 2 kilowatts to 8.5 kilowatts. It's amazing. You probably need quite a big roof to get 8.5 kilowatts. That's going to be something like 30 plus panels on your roof. But if you have a suitable roof, you can do it. Or if you're in a rural area, for instance, you may well do a ground mount system. They're actually very, very practical if you've got the space. So why would you want more solar than you actually can use? Well, it's about solar producers in real time. And if it's an overcast day, an 8.5 kilowatt system might be putting out 1 kilowatt. It's actually not an 8.5 kilowatt output. It never is because of losses anyway, but it might only be producing 1 kilowatt. But that might be what your home's using. So you actually, even on overcast days, are self-consuming all renewable energy. So oversizing actually is a very sensible design philosophy to maximize the amount of renewable energy without having to use storage. And like I said, because of the incentives for solar being all about the solar panels and nothing else, more solar generally doesn't mean more cost. Though, possibly a bigger inverter and a little bit more racking is part of that. But yeah, the labor content doesn't change tremendously. Usually it'll still be the same crew, one day, finish the job, whether it's a 1 kilowatt system or a 7 or 8 kilowatt system, because it's the setup and a lot of the work down at the switchboard that's going to take time. What about installed capacity for large-scale solar? Now, this is where I'm jumping from individual to large generators. So this would be generators that are in the multi-megawatt, over 5 megawatt capacity range into the wholesale electricity market. It's just gone ballistic in the last 3 years. Look at those 3 last huge columns, the amount of large-scale solar. Why is that? Well, solar has turned out to be so cheap and it's very expandable too. Like if you're going to build a coal-fired power station, it's going to take like 10 years, I don't know, a long, long time. And once you build it, it's got a fixed capacity and that's it. Solar can actually be rolled out progressively. So they can build a solar farm in stages. That's a plus. It's very quick, often, from planning to completion, less than 2 years. The price of generation is almost zero once it's built. So that's the difference. There's no fuel costs. The sun, so far, is free. No one's managed to tax it, except apparently in Turkey. You get taxed if you have solar panels. But anyway, there you go. So large-scale solar producing in the sort of 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour is so cheap compared to any other generating source. And as a result, large-scale has taken off. Also, state governments like Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria have been very encouraging for producing large-scale solar projects. One of the sort of impediments, though, has been the transmission infrastructure, and that's something the federal government's addressing at the moment, is how to deal with getting all those remote solar farms to produce the power back to where we use it, which is in the cities and industrial hubs. So I guess that's a bit of feel good. We're doing very well with large scale solar. Okay, back to incentive programs. Now, we're blessed at living in Victoria, where we have the special government department called Solar Victoria, and they've been really enthusiastic advocates for renewable energy. They have a whole bunch of rebate programs. They change so often. I haven't even updated the slide for a few months. It's probably changed again. But as you can see, there are 8 different programs running at the moment. The rule generally is that you can only get incentive for one of those. So if you're getting the solar panel rebate, you won't get the hot water rebate. If you get the battery rebate, you won't get the solar panel rebate, for instance. But there are some people who got a federal rebate. It doesn't disadvantage you for getting the Victorian state rebate. So you might have got solar panels installed under the federal scheme, and you're accessing the Victorian solar battery scheme. Separate incentive programs, so you're eligible for both. Down the bottom there, zero emission vehicles, i.e. electric vehicles. I don't think there's many hydrogen-powered vehicles on the road, and virtual power plants. Now, I'm going to talk more about virtual power plants when I get onto community energy in a bit more depth. But there's just a smattering of those programs, and it's worth going to the government website if you're interested. So it's solar.vic.gov.au. I probably should have, Jeff, if you wanted to put that link in the chat for me, that will save me trying to type it while I'm talking. So, no questions yet? Feeling pretty lonely here. Thanks, Jeff. Okay. Yeah, and some of these schemes have reducing incentives, so beware that it's often the case is that they're most attractive at the beginning, and then they start to reduce the incentive program. So just make sure you check the latest information before making that decision. A lot of these rebates come with a lot of conditions and paperwork associated with them, so they do try to stop rorting of the system, but it does make it a little bit of a bit of administrative pain. And as you can see, solar hot water's in there as well, because it is, after all, renewable energy, using the sun to heat water. The PV rebate, you actually get both the federal and the state rebates, so that's kind of a big plus. That can really bring down the cost of a solar-only photovoltaic system. All right, so the federal scheme, so that was the Victorian scheme, and there's also an energy efficiency scheme for Victoria, so that you may have had someone knock on your door and offer to change the lights in your house to LEDs. If you have an antiquated chimney, they might have offered to put a chimney balloon in. Even power boards swap out, and energy meters. There were quite a lot of different things that fell under the Victorian Energy Efficiency Scheme. That was another Victorian incentive, which is demand reduction. Actually, it's just as effective as generation is to reduce demand. But on the federal scene, we've got administered through the Clean Energy Regulator, which is a government department for regulating the economic economic incentives and rules around their renewable energy projects, is the small scale scheme. The small scale renewable energy scheme, or SRES for short, has been going, like I said, for 20 years. But since 2015, the incentive has been wound back 1 year at a time. Now, how they do that is you get to claim the notional production of your solar power system for the next X number of years. So in up to 2015, it was 15 years in advance you could claim the production of your system, even though it might not be there, but you did get it as a discount. It's been dropping 1 year at a time. So since it rolls out to 2030, I think we're down to 9 years of deeming left. This leads to a little bit of misleading advertising around the end of every calendar year. You'll get companies saying, rebates ending soon, get in quick, and very loud and shouty kind of advertising. What they're basically saying is that the deeming period is going to drop by 1 year. Now, I wouldn't worry about it because miraculously, the price of solar panels have tracked at about the same rate. So solar panels get cheaper and eventually the deeming period drops off and there's almost no difference in price. So it's not like get in quick or you'll miss out. It's just a little bit of high pressure sales strategy. Those certificates, by the way, are actually yours because it's your system, but almost everyone assigns them to their electricity, so to their renewable solar power installer or retailer who's selling the system as an upfront point of sale discount. They'll often give you a slightly lower value for the certificates than the trading price at the moment because it is a tradable market. There's a risk factor, so they'll factor in risk. So, I think the around about the $38 mark is probably what they can trade them at, but they'll often offer them at a little bit less because of the administrative overhead of that. All right, I've just got a question. Yay, John. Is there an incentive to convert gas instantaneous hot water service to electric heat pump? I can't answer that one off the top of my head because I haven't looked at it lately because these schemes keep changing, but I'm pretty sure that getting off gas is the same as you're basically installing renewable energy, so you'll get the solar hot water rebate. When I last did a hot water service system, you had to prove that you were decommissioning an existing one, like provide an evidence of a receipt from a recycler or picture of the tank having a hole drilled in it, all sorts of stuff, or a certificate from your plumber to say that you decommissioned your existing system and replaced it with one that's covered by the rebate. I would argue that you're probably going to save more money too, because gas prices, unlike electricity prices, have skyrocketed. So, we're basically paying global prices for our gas now. And because of the war in Ukraine, that's just gone ballistic as well. So, yeah, just for no other reason just than saving money, I'd be thinking about moving off gas altogether. So thanks, Robin. Robin's answered that one for me too. Great. Hive mind here. And here we are with an electricity bill. Now, there's kind of this thing called obfuscation through complexity. It's really hard to understand electricity bills. Even I struggle sometimes with all the different ways they report that information. And you wonder what down the bottom there, they're different rates in dollars per kilowatt hour, for instance, for different time periods such as peak, off-peak, and shoulder. There may be some export for solar as well. You see that there's a Victorian solar feed-in tariff offered there at 15 cents on that one. So that's a cost reduction factor. So it's a credit. How do you know how much energy you use? Well, if you go up the top of that bill, they often give you a summary, and they'll give you things like a daily average with a little graph to the left showing your change of usage over the year. They might give you some greenhouse gas emissions information so you can see what your emissions intensity looks like. If you want to know how you pitch in terms of energy consumption, the national average is around 20 to 22 kilowatt hours per day. Depends a bit on which state you're in. So Victoria is a little bit lower, surprisingly, because we have so much gas. We use less electricity than our Queensland and New South Wales brethren do because they don't have as much gas. But that's changing. So yeah, around the 20 something mark is fairly typical, but of course it depends very much on your circumstances. If you have large electrical loads like underfloor heating, I feel sorry for you because they're very expensive to run. Swimming pool. A swimming pool is really another, from an electrical load point of view, another house in the back garden that you didn't know you had. So, energy usage can change. But there's a good one to sort of see how you fit into the mix of energy use. All right, let's get on to the technical a bit more. How do you actually produce electricity from a solar PV system? PV short for photovoltaic. Basically, they convert the energy from the sun in terms of the light from the sun, the photons, not the heat, into electricity using cells. I won't go too much into that. Those silicon cells create what's known as DC electricity. Now, DC, direct current, is not what we use in our homes. For running appliances, we use alternating current, or AC. So they convert from DC to AC. Hence, the name inverter means alternating the direction. DC's constant, and so it basically makes it go this way, then this way, then this way, then this way, 100 times a second, and you end up with AC. That's the Reader's Digest version of how an inverter works. One of the key things that an inverter does is actually optimize the operation of your solar panels. Now, it's important to think about this. Sometimes people ask me, what happens if I turn my inverter off? Will my solar panels overheat? Now, they might be thinking of solar hot water, because basically a solar hot water panel does actually get very hot when it hasn't got water running through it. But a photovoltaic panel actually only produces electricity when it's told to. And the amount that it produces and the operating range that it works at is determined by the inverter itself. So I like to call an inverter a smart load. It actually applies a load to the panels, and they produce energy at a certain rate. That means that the solar inverter can actually derate the panels, make them produce less than they're designed for, if there is a reason. For instance, you've been told by your electricity distributor that you have to export limit to a certain amount. That means you can't export more than, say, 5 kilowatts of solar power. The inverter will derate your system to achieve that. That functionality, by the way, is called a maximum power point tracking service, or MPPT for short, maximum power point tracker. And look, fun fact, it's an Australian invention. The maximum power point tracker was invented by Stuart Watkinson back in 1983, a young Queensland electrical engineer, as the first really efficient way of operating solar panels electrically. Australia's done some great things: the stump jump plough, Wi-Fi, and MPPT. There you go, all Australian inventions. An inverter can be installed inside or outside. I would suggest that outside is the most common place, because they're rated for outdoor installations. They are subject to some conditions, such as heat. You don't want to put them where they're in direct sun, because they are trying to convert at very high efficiency DC to AC, but there's still some heat load as a result of that. 3 or 4% of their production is dissipated as heat, and if you put them in direct sunlight, they might derate. The other reason you probably don't want to put them inside, particularly in a living space, is they do make a little bit of noise. Some of them have fans that will come on when they're working hard, and that's like every sunny day. Some of them they all produce a high frequency switching signal. You can't, well, when I say if you're over about 18 to 20 years, you probably can't hear it, because you can't hear those really high frequencies in the 18 to 20 kilohertz range, but they're there. And that can be very annoying to young kids and teenagers. So you probably don't want to put them in a living space. I have heard that they're a teenage deterrent. They won't hang around if you've got one, so maybe it's a plus. They do need adequate ventilation. Of course, your installer will install it as per the manufacturer's recommendation. Generally, it means a little bit of space around the unit. And it should be in a location that you can inspect it from time to time, because if anything goes wrong, let's say some cables gets damaged on your roof, you need to know that there's a fault, and the inverters have what's known as an earth fault detection system. They'll raise an alarm and make a noise and have some flashing information on the screen, usually, or a red light, to tell you that the system is potentially dangerous. So they don't actually stop the fault. They just alert you to the fact that there is a potential fault, and you should contact your installer. Just point out that Jeff's put some more notes in the chat there about gas backup is not required for heat pumps. That's good to know. So you can completely divest yourself of gas. And we have had some wonderful presentations from Reclaim Energy and Sandon Systems at various Healesville core meetings. Those are some of the highest efficiency heat pumps you can get. Okay, let's look at inverters. The different types of inverters. Now, most people will be thinking an inverter converts solar power into AC so far, but actually some convert battery DC into AC power. So the one on the left here is a battery inverter. The battery inverter may well have a solar functionality built in as well, and we call those hybrid. So I think I'll bring that one up. So this is a hybrid inverter. That means it can take both solar and battery. Now, why would you choose one over the other? If I were a customer who already had solar power system and I've already got a solar inverter and I want to add battery storage, I don't need a hybrid inverter. I could just get a battery inverter and a battery. What does that look like? Well, many companies actually package these together as a single product. You might have heard of Tesla Powerwall. It's a popular brand. There are many products like it, which is basically a battery with an inverter in one box. And so it's a retrofit solution, or even as part of a new build. Hybrid inverters, by the way, because they can have batteries added to them, often can work without batteries. So they can be what's called battery ready. So if you are kind of, after this talk thinking, oh, Glen's saying batteries probably aren't worth it financially, but maybe they will be, but I might change my mind. You could install a hybrid inverter. They're a little bit more expensive than just a normal grid connect solar only inverter, but it means you have the option at a later stage to connect a battery system to it. I should warn you though that they may be specifically suitable for certain types of batteries, and that those batteries may change over time. So, if you come back 5 years later to one of these companies and say, I'd like a battery, please, they say, we don't make that model anymore. So just beware, you might be time limited on when you can access an additional battery storage system. And I did say all-in-one solutions. And this is the so-called AC battery. Basically, it produces AC power on its output, but it's a battery inside there with an inverter, a battery inverter, all in one box. Very elegant design and relatively simple to install. Now, I mentioned solar shading as a problem, shading of solar panels. There are things you can do about that. First up, you try to avoid it. The installer should try and put the panels where shading is minimized. But modern homes, it's actually quite difficult because we've got a lot of stuff going on our roofs, chimneys, satellite dishes, antennas, ventilation pipes, you name it, gables. Gables annoy me as an installer. We take up a lot of roof space and cast a lot of shadows on your roof. But if you can't avoid them, what can you do to optimize a system design? Now, one thing is having what they call module level power electronics. Big, long name, MLPE for short. These are devices which are attached to each panel, which independently operate each panel. So if one panel's shaded, the other panels in the system aren't affected. Why is it affecting the other panels for a start? I didn't explain that one very well. The panels are generally installed in a string. That means it's connected in series together. And if you shade one panel, it has a impact across the rest of the panels in terms of reducing the current flow or the voltage of the system. So a small amount of shading on one panel can have a disproportionate effect on the whole grouping of panels, or what's called the array. But having these so-called optimizers on each panel, that completely takes away that problem. So each panel works as best it can independently of every other panel. They also give you what's known as module level monitoring. So you can actually see the production of every panel, any fault conditions. For those who are interested in the really detail of the performance of a system, it gives you a lot of data. So that's a bit of a plus. And on very big systems, it's handy for identifying which module has failed. If there is 160 modules on a roof and one of them's not working, how do you find it? Well, using these optimizers, they'll often report, and you have what's known as a map, a module map when it's installed, and then go, it's module second row, third across. That's the one that's faulty. We'll replace that. And this is a reporting of one of those systems. This is actually my neighbour's house here. And if you can see the house picture on the bottom there, the panels on the left-hand side of the screen, one of them is getting quite a bit of shading from the second story, rather unusual shaped roof. And if you look above there, there's the performance of each panel. And you'll notice panel 1.1.4, which is the partially shaded one. Its production is about 20% down compared to the others. and that's because of that shading. So every panel's doing its best. There's also variation from panel to panel, even from the same batch. So, usually only about 3%, but this evens that out. It gets the best out of every panel. So looking at the ones which are completely unshaded, you'll see that some are, 1 or 2 kilowatt hours better than others. So there you go. You get a little bit of a boost having that level of monitoring. Okay, I can see some questions. So Rachel says, does it matter what phase your property is on, 2-phase, or do you need 3-phase? Okay, little bit of electrical theory here. If you've got 2 wires coming to your house, you're probably a single-phase installation, which would be most residential homes in Australia. If you've got 1 wire coming to your house, you're probably on a rural property on what's known as a single wire earth return system, which actually is a 2-phase system. There'll be another wire going in another direction, probably to a farm shed, and that's known as a split phase or 2-phase system. And if you've got fairly large loads like ducted air conditioning or your industrial commercial, you'll definitely have 3-phase power. Now, 3-phase power is really what's distributed down the street in every residential area. And sometimes you'll have that delivered straight to your house. It doesn't actually matter whether you're single-phase, 2-phase, or 3-phase. There are solar inverters for all those solutions. So just be aware that you will have to probably alert when you're shopping around for a system, what type of electrical phase options you have available to you. So I hope that explains that, Rachel. And then Robin's asked, Glenn, I have microinverters on my panels. How do solar panel optimizers differ from microinverters? Great. It's a good segue to my next slide, actually. I've been showing DC optimizers, which means it's DC from the panel into the optimizer, then DC out to the string that connects to all the optimizers together back to the inverter. So it's all DC on the roof with optimizers. Whereas with microinverters, these things, they actually, at the point of connection to the microinverter, convert from DC to AC. That means there's no DC cables coming off your roof or going through your building. And that's seen to be a safety benefit, because DC actually is more dangerous than AC. DC, particularly if it's sourced from the sun, it's pretty hard to stop it when things go wrong because you can't turn the sun off. But with AC, you can just turn off the main switch at the switchboard and all those microinverters will shut down. Microinverters also give you the same module level monitoring and module level optimization that DC optimizers do. So that's another plus for it. And I suppose lastly, you don't have another big box on the wall down at the switchboard because all of the inversion's done on the roof. You only have an AC cable coming from the roof to your switchboard. So Robin, I hope that explains that one. Now, I said we're going to have a short break just to grab, glass of water, comfort stop. I'm going to suggest we do it now for 5 minutes. So just 5 minutes. I'll blank my screen. We'll keep the recordings running. And I'll be back in 5 minutes. And I'm back. Hope that was a beneficial 5 minutes for everyone. And I hope you had a chance to think about some questions you might have. Remember, this is an interactive event. You're welcome to live ask questions. Just turn on your microphone and or camera, type them into the chat. That would be great. All right, so I'm going to just go back to my presentation, and yeah. So I'm not sure if everyone's back yet. I don't know if anyone wants to let me know that you're there and listening. It feels a bit weird. I can't even see any pictures. Oh, great. Rachel, you're there. Fantastic. Looks like you're in heaven, Rachel. Just need some white puffy clouds. And yeah, I got a few waves. Thank you, Robin and Rachel. A thumbs up from John. Excellent. Yeah, so onto batteries. Now, batteries have got a lot of attention lately for very good reasons. The national electricity market, which is really the eastern seaboard of Australia, has been struggling with the rapid uptake of renewable energy, the amount being injected into the grid. And large batteries, what you call utility scale batteries, have been one of those solutions. You might remember Elon Musk's little banter about it's 100 days we can install this big battery or it's free to Mike Cannon-Brookes. That actually happened kind of in 100 days. It just shows you how quickly you can roll out a renewable energy resource or storage. And what that huge battery did wasn't like run the grid. It didn't allow the lights or the generators to be turned off. It helped stabilize the grid. So batteries actually perform a very useful function, even on a small scale like domestic, when aggregated, to help stabilize the grid. You might wonder, well, wasn't he stabilizing? Surely, there's generators pumping out electricity and we consume it. Isn't there more to it than that? There is more to it than that. They have to be exactly the right balance to a very fine degree. And how do you balance that? Well, there's slow methods, which is actually bringing on generation and taking it off. Now, that's something that the Australian Energy Market Operator does, is manage that. Also, with loads, they sometimes manage big loads like aluminium smelters and large industrial customers, asking them to turn off for short periods of high demand. But a battery can jump in just a few hundred milliseconds and suck up or source a small amount of energy to help buffer those very short-term fluctuations in the balance between generation and consumption. And the value of that actually is reflected in a market known as the Frequency Control and Ancillary Services Market, or FCAS for short. The reason I'm telling you all this is actually one of the motivating factors, even for domestic batteries, is to provide another income stream for having storage. And I'll circle back to this in a minute. I'm getting a little bit off track. So why would you want batteries? Well, energy storage for later use is the obvious one. You've got solar panels, you're not at home during the day, or you've got surplus, you can store it in a battery and use it at night time. So it means that your renewable energy portion or quotient goes up. You actually got more renewable energy being used in your home. So that's what's called energy shifting the production from the day to the night. It may provide backup during a grid outage. Now, I've put the may word in there because not all battery storage systems actually have a backup functionality. Some of them are just designed to optimize self-usage, so just be aware of that. There are many technologies, and there are quite a lot of rules around where you can install a battery storage system. I mean, the current popular chemistry being lithium ion. Sorry, I need a drink of water. Should have had that when I had my break. Lithium ion actually is quite a flammable component, but so is the petrol in your car. We're not banning cars because they contain flammable petrol. But we have a lot of safety systems around controlling that. So you go to a service station and you're told not to smoke while you're filling up your car and not to talk on your mobile phone. You should be over 16. Doesn't seem very strict, does it? I often say if all cars ran on LPG and then someone came along and said, oh, I've got a better solution, it's called petroleum. You just poke it through an open hole in the side of your car and pour it in and tell people not to smoke. It would never get approved from a safety perspective. But anyway, we've got it. So batteries are a bit like that too. There is an electrical risk, there is an explosion risk, a fire risk, toxic fume risk, all sorts of risks associated with batteries, but we manage it through product standards and where you can install them. So just be aware that if you're going to get a battery storage system, your installer might have to do a site visit. They should do a site visit to work out where they can put them. You can't put them in habitable rooms, for instance. You can't put them in lounges, bedrooms, kitchens. The popular places are storerooms and garages. If you put them on a wall and there is a habitable room behind, you've got to put a fire barrier between them, which usually is a large extent of cement sheeting, extending 600 mils either side and 900 mils above. And so that's to protect against heat transmission through the wall should it fail. I think our standards, well, I know our standards are probably the strictest in the world. write them, but I didn't mean I put all the strictures in there. But they are very, very strict because we've taken a very conservative approach. That it's generally, particularly with lithium-ion, a new technology. But there are many other battery technologies coming along, which we will see on the market soon. And some of them are probably the safest battery you could imagine. There's no explosive gases, combustible fluids. Basically, the only hazard might be electrical. They're a battery and they have electricity coming out of them. And so it'd be interesting to see, how long it takes for other competing technologies to get a foothold. And it might loosen up some of our restrictions about where you can install a battery system. Okay, can batteries be retrofitted? I think I've already mentioned that if you've already got solar, you can add batteries, and that's why something like a battery inverter and a battery can be added to any existing solar, but there will be some conditions around that. Sometimes it's very easy, so using some brand names like Tesla, Sonnen, Varta, Enphase, Scenic and others, they can be what's called AC coupled. That means the output of their own dedicated inverter just connects to your switchboard. There's a little bit of a sensing equipment which senses which direction the power is going. Is it leaving your property or coming in? If it's leaving, that means you've got surplus and it will charge the battery. So you could add another hybrid system. That means it's got solar and battery. That might help you if you want more solar. So hybrid can be added as well. But there are many restrictions on capacity. Now, the electricity distributors will often put a maximum inverter capacity requirement. This varies dramatically across Australia, but say where we are in AusNet region, they typically will have a 5 kilowatt inverter capacity limit, possibly with an extra 5 kilowatts permitted for export. So that could mean you have up to 10 kilowatts of inverter capacity. But you won't really know until your installer has submitted an application to see what they'll permit. And it's basically they're protecting their assets. Because when you export power onto the network, it's got to go through their transformers in the reverse direction. They are bidirectional. And so if every house in the street has solar and they're all pushing out lots of power exactly at the same time, which is how solar panels work, and they work directly off the sun's output, therefore there could be an overload. There's also a reverse problem, which is you could be self-consuming all of your solar energy. You've got lots of big systems in a street, they've all self-consuming all of their solar energy, and then suddenly there is a power quality issue, like a frequency movement or a voltage dip on the network, and they all turn off together because actually they're required to disconnect when there is outside of a certain frequency and voltage range on the network. That means suddenly all the load, what we call hidden load, which was being powered by your solar, powering your loads in your home, at the same moment falls back onto the grid. And so it's a step change of demand, which can be a problem. So those are two reasons they're often limiting the amount of inverter capacity. If you're lucky enough to have three-phase, the limits are much higher, typically 3 times or more higher, because three-phase is more robust. But you do require what's known as phase balancing if you're over 5 kilowatts per phase. That means they all work together in unison. Monitoring. Monitoring is really useful just to know that everything's working as it should do. Many inverters come, in fact, I would even say most inverters come with monitoring built in. They monitor their own production. They'll often have an app and a Wi-Fi connection or an Ethernet connection, a wired Ethernet, and that's very useful for just keeping an eye on that everything's going as it should be. But there are third-party appliances that can be installed. I've got a picture of one on the screen here that can monitor many systems at the same time. So let's say you've got brand A and brand B solar inverters, but you actually want to know what both of them are doing at the same time. That's where a non-proprietary solution can come in handy. And some of these also can control loads. That means based on the amount of surplus solar you have, they can turn things on and off. It's pretty nice. Now, a couple of last slides here. This is just showing a house in Healesville, where nearby where I live. This is a Healesville core member, and just showing the generated power is in orange. Generation from the grid is in orange, and in green is their solar production, green for good, and blue is their exported power. So you can see the lump in the middle of the day is their solar. look how low the peak is. It's only 1 kilowatt, 1,000 watts is the peak of their solar. This Healesville core member, by the way, has upgraded their system significantly since then, but they're a very small energy user. So everything under the green is self-used, and any surplus gets exported to the grid, which is the blue parts. If you look at it over a longer period of time, like here over a whole month, you can see the amount of exported energy is very small and almost all self-consumed. So this person has a very high self-consumption ratio. And this is some examples of the monitoring that came with the inverter, just so reporting how it's working. A little bit on economic analysis. This is another Healesville home, and actually a friend of mine, we put solar on their house. Now they had a little project system on their back garage. This is not grid connected. It was like, some 12-volt panels that they were doing some battery charging with or something for their boat. But they wanted to put solar on the main part of the house. Now the top of the screen is north, and remember I said north is where predominantly the sun will be, and therefore you would think north is the best surface, but there's actually not much north. It's just a little bit here. The house predominantly faces east and west. But it turns out that's a better match to their energy use, because up until recently, because they just retired recently actually, they were hardly ever home during the day. So they were actually better off producing less overall kilowatt hours of energy, but more of it when they were at home, and that reduced their bill more, because an east-facing panel will work very early in the morning and a west-facing panel to later in the day than a north-facing system. Sometimes people refer to east-west as the new north, because it's actually a very popular orientation for maximizing self-consumption. And I think that's, where's my slide stuck? Oh, hang on, my slide's stuck. My mouse is stuck. You know what? The battery of my mouse just went off. Hang on. I'll just turn it back on again. Got it. There we go. Yeah, so, gee, I'm going to have to charge my mouse. That's a pretty fun thing. I can operate from the keyboard. Slight technical hitch there. So going down the economic path for this same customer, and this was done some years ago, probably about 3, 4, 5 years ago, we looked at a purchase price of about $6,000. That was after rebates. And looking at their energy use patterns and the production of the system, we discovered that the break-even point from simple payback was around 5 years. 5 years and 1 month, actually, was the payback period. That's a pretty good investment for something that's got a lifespan of 25 years. And solar panels last a long, long time. You might notice just behind me, where are we there, is a solar panel. There's some blue lights. Obviously, it's not working because it's indoors. That panel was made in 1984, and it still works. If I put it in the sun, it would still work. So they last a very long time. They do degrade slowly in terms of the cell efficiency goes down, what's known as their fill factor. They lose a little bit of voltage over time. And so after 25 years, you might be down to typically 80% of their original rated power. Now, that's pretty damn good. Your car probably wouldn't do so well. And that's got to be serviced. These don't need to be serviced. They basically just work because they're out in the sun. The adding a battery to this system, same house, same solar panel system, 6.6 kilowatts from memory. We added a battery, and that just pushed the price up $10,000, just like that, because that's the cost of that battery. It's pushed the payback out to 8 years and 10 months, which is just shy of the warranty period of 10 years. So it looks like after nearly the end of life of the battery system, it's finally paid for itself. But beyond that, you can't guarantee that it's going to be still working. Well, that's what a warranty is. It's a point at which they will replace it. But also you've got to consider that most battery technologies, their capacity is reduced over time. So they might have only 60 to 80% of the capacity they had when they were brand new. So the amount of usefulness starts to fade away too as time passes. Nearly through this slide deck. This is my place where I live at Mirramura Community Cooperative on Mount Tillybawong, and there's quite a lot of solar in my house. about 10 kilowatts all up. I've got solar panels used to shade the building. In fact, that's one of the side benefits of putting solar on your house, is it actually protects the direct solar radiation hitting your if you've got a tin roof particularly, and entering the building, so it shades the building. On the right hand side of my house, you might see there's a solar pergola, because that's the western side of the house where the sun is most intense, and then most heating of the building will be in the late afternoon and summer. Also got evacuated tube systems, which actually we've retired because we've moved to using photovoltaic water heating systems. So we use surplus solar and some dedicated DC solar for heating water in the house. And there's also solar thermal, hydronic heating of the slab through hot water as well, and that's predominantly photovoltaic sourced as well. So that's where I live, Mount Tillibawong, and that's my microgrid, my community energy system, a miniature one of 7 homes, all linked up as a small independent grid. There is no utility grid on the property, so we're all self-contained. And you can also see some of the food production on the right-hand side of the screen there. So this is my community, 47 years without mains power, and it's going well. So it was pretty tough back in the 70s. In fact, Jeff used to be a member of Miramar Co-op, so he probably remembers the early days. But these days we've got low-cost solar off-grid is very, very viable. Now I'm just going to see if my mouse has woken up yet. Let's have a look. Mouse off, mouse on. Yep, I've got my mouse back. Great. All right, so that's really the technical stuff around things you can do to reduce the cost of electricity, how solar photovoltaic and battery storage systems work, and solar hot water and heat pumps. But how does the community energy part fit in? Now, I've got a separate presentation. Actually, this is from a community energy system called SolarQuip, and this is a good intro into how all that works. So let me just bring that one up. Yeah, so approximately 1 in 10 homes in Australia is a multiple occupancy building, so an apartment building. I'm not sure, I haven't been to Pakenham for a long time, but I'm not sure if you've got any multiple occupancy there. But it's really a problem for installing solar, because generally there'll be a body corporate which manage the whole building, and the benefit of putting solar onto that building will just go to the body corporate assets such as hallway lighting, car park lighting, but not much else. How do you get individual units within a multiple occupancy building to be able to benefit from solar? Well, this is something, it's actually a Melbourne developed product from a company called Illume, and it's now, they've installed thousands of these, both in Australia, UK, and I think in the US as well. What they do is allow a single PV system on a multiple occupancy building to share energy equitably through all the tenants in that building. It doesn't have to be equitably, by the way. They pointed out they can share it in any ratio you like. I've got one customer who owns a high-rise building on the Sunshine Coast, and he's got the top 4 floors, lucky him, and he wants to have all of the solar cover all of his loads, and only what's left over go to the rest of the tenants. Nice guy. But anyway, it's totally doable with this SolarQuip system. Now, I should point out it's not a inverter. It's actually some smart electronic switching that controls when surplus power goes to which apartment in a complex. It's also very useful if you've got things like EV charging facilities, so they might be a shared resource, and so it can prioritize EV charging, which could be a community benefit. So yeah, like, as I said, they've got over 1,000 apartments connected, and typically an apartment will be 10 or more occupants, so it's a lot of customers. And there's the product itself. So like I say, it's basically smart switching inside a box that you would connect the inverter system to, and all of the connections go to the meter board where all the main switchboard where all the apartments are supplied from. So it does kind of work only if you have a level of co-location. That means in an apartment building, you would have all the meters at one spot for all the individual apartments, and they put what's known as a CT or current transformer on each customer's supply from the grid, and they feed in surplus power through a complicated switching system to each of the apartments. And so if you were doing a perfectly shared system, you would averaged over a monthly period, everyone would get the same amount of solar. It varies a little bit in terms of how they use power, but for instance, this is an example of a typical day where you have solar power and no SolarShare device. Solar power is the green part here, and energy use is the blue. And so whenever you're using more energy than the solar's producing, you'll be sucking in power from the grid. Adding the SolarShare system means that it's almost a bit like a battery. When the sun's shining, it's supplying all of your electricity use with SolarShare power up to the maximum shared over a period of, say, typically a month. So let's say, after 20 days, you've used your allocation of renewable energy, then you would fall back onto grid only. So that's one way it works to share equitably that energy. So the benefits are both environmental, that's allow putting solar onto the roofs of all those apartment buildings, savings in terms of self-use. Self-use will give you the biggest savings in electricity, but you may well also benefit from some export, reduced dependence on the grid, i.e. You still need the grid for synchronization and stabilization. There's no battery storage involved here. But also owner-occupiers and investors will receive additional benefit through reduced body corporate fees. So there's a nice one. So that's the Illume system, which is a community energy system, allowing up to several hundred apartments to be supplied. But really, what they say the limit is roughly 10 stories. It's to do with how far they can run their cabling for monitoring. So that's an interesting limitation. And it does require that co-location of the grid meters. So that's a little presentation that Illume did to a community group. So I just borrowed that from them. Looking to see if there's any questions. No, still very quiet on the questions front. Still got everyone there. Yep. All right. Well, I've got a few minutes left before I'm going to hand back to Jeff, and I'm just going to talk a little about some other community projects in terms of energy, starting with Melbourne and the Yarra Energy Foundation. So I'm just going to share that webpage. Now, this was actually one of the self-directed learning links that I sent you. Was a link to the Yarra Energy Foundation. They recently launched a community battery. Now, that big thing undercover there with a cute name called Pixie is a community battery, community-owned battery. And it's therefore provides some financial benefit to those that invested in that scheme. It provides services to the network. Remember, I mentioned frequency control and ancillary services. That's one of its sort of key functions, is actually help the network become stabilized. It also reduces the amount of energy that's being transmitted long distances, because if you're generating power in your street and it's being stored at the end of the street and then being released in the evening to other houses in that street, the transmission losses are massively reduced, and it also keeps the transmission costs down. Now, whether there's an agreement with the distributor of electricity for that to happen, it depends on where you are, but they may reduce what's known as the DUOS, the distributed cost of electricity on the bill of customers. Oh, I got a question. So Jeff asks, Glenn, do you know if SolarShare system can be used by landlords to monitor a tenant's solar energy use for a single residence that has solar panels? I don't think you need to be that sophisticated, Jeff. You could actually monitor with other simple means the amount of energy being used by a customer. You could just put an energy meter in. There are products like Solar Analytics, which is 4G connected little meter that goes on your board, so you don't need to connect to the customer's Wi-Fi or anything. And it directly measures your import and export from the grid, as well as your solar production, and comes with a nice little monitoring app on your phone. And it even has this new thing called bill optimization, which sounds flash. It is. What it does is it compares your energy use to the best electricity retail plan there is to reduce the cost of electricity. So none of that having to go around websites looking for the best deal and try to work out what is the best deal. Their software, their analytics does it for you. So that's solaranalytics.com.au, and I'm just putting it in the chat there. John asks, can Chinese panels offer good value? About 95% of all panels in the world are made in China. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're kind of the solar superpower now. Really, it's China, Taiwan, and Korea. If you're buying German solar panels, they're probably counterfeit because they don't make them anymore. There was a real challenge with quality some decade ago where there was a lot of poor quality product being dumped on the Australian market from China, partly because the incentive programs, the export incentives in China were open to all players, and they got, I think, about 15% export incentive. So it helped them, export a lot of solar panels. And that meant, a company that would be making T-shirts would also get into making solar panels on the other side of the room, sort of hand soldered together and shipped out. It's really hard to tell looking at a panel if it's well made, because it's the components that you can't really analyze visually. And so the Chinese government cut back on those incentives till there's only a handful of the top players left. Now, these are companies, brand names like JA Solar, Jinko, Longi. They'll be the three biggest in the world that make enormous amounts of solar panels, and predominantly they're for the utility market. So the residential market is just a spin-off of the utility market. Utility customers are very risk averse. They're basically entering into power purchase agreements for 20 plus years. They do not want to buy shonky product because it'll cost them, and they are the toughest customers to meet in terms of a quality assessment. So yeah, absolutely, you get good value panels from China, along with almost every other thing in my room. It's just amazing. It is the manufacturing hub of the world. Thanks for that question, John. The next web page I wanted to point you to was this wonderful group called the Total Renewable Yakandanda. They're a Victorian town that were one of the leaders in terms of community energy. They've managed to access some very generous incentives from state government. They've gone one step further than just producing renewable energy at a community level on a community-owned building or community asset, but they're also storing it as well. So they've got battery storage, large battery storage, which also can provide resilience. Now, what I mean there is that if the network, the poles and wires basically fail because of a storm or something, they've actually got a level of resilience, or the transmission to that site, I should say. So they've got some stored energy that can run a small amount of the community independently without the grid. So that's a really big plus. So that's Yakandanda, totally renewable Yakandanda. I've already covered Illume. That's Illume's webpage, illumeenergy.com.au, with apartment and other common occupancy sites. I did ask them, would it be suitable for supermarkets? And they said it could be, but really supermarkets haven't been on their target. They're actually very focused on assisting, low-cost housing and more at the community level than commercial level in coming up with solutions to share solar. The federal government, through ARENA, which is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and by the way, we nearly lost them. If the election hadn't gone the way it did, they were going to be shut down. They actually are big supporters of renewable energy projects. They provide funding and technical assistance and evaluation. And they've recently released this document, or this information about the benefits of community scale batteries and the viability of those systems. So you'll see that FCAS comes up again, frequency control and ancillary services. If you wonder kind of how this works, whenever there is a slight disturbance on the grid, like there's a slight frequency dip, that's a sign that there's not enough power being pushed into the grid. That tiny frequency dip triggers a price signaling to sell electricity onto the grid. Now, there's very few technologies that can do it faster than, there's none that can do it faster than a battery. A battery is 100 to 200 milliseconds after it gets that signal, it starts to export. A combined cycle gas turbine, 5 minutes or so to get it up to speed. A hydro power station with ready to go water and opening valves, about 30 minutes. So what's happened is batteries, to use the parlance, have eaten the lunch of gas and coal fire and hydro in terms of providing FCAS solutions. And they get paid for the amount of capacity that they have available. So it can be very, very profitable. The big battery in South Australia, for instance, has paid for itself in only a matter of a couple of years. So that was, $100 million system or something. It paid for itself in a couple of years. Actually, I'm not sure what the price was, but it was a lot of millions, just through providing that service in real time. Point two really is reducing local network traffic, network as in electricity around the electricity poles and wires, and householders care about affordability, don't we all? Network tariffs and market signals can shape how that battery actions contribute. So this is where the pricing of power in terms of whether you're importing or exporting. And now we'll come to point 8 in a minute, which is kind of where it gets a bit complicated. Community scale batteries can increase the amount of DER. Don't you love a good 3-letter acronym? DER is distributed energy resources. People in the industry don't refer to batteries and solar. They talk about DER because they're at the ends of the network. They're distributed. They're not centrally located like a coal-fired power station. And so a distributed energy resource really is just solar and batteries. One of the big benefits of that is that you've got very small transmission losses. You're not transmitting power from Latrobe Valley to Mildura and losing 30% of it on the way. It's being distributed along the local lines and therefore very, very low losses and capacity constraints. Just jumping down to the last point, which is industry professionals saw significant potential benefits of community scale batteries, including behind the meter, BTM, another acronym, and virtual power plants. What on earth is this virtual power plant? Well, remember I said we've got 3 million homes with solar panels on them. We don't actually know how many have batteries because there's no incentive from the federal government to provide battery storage. There is some state-based schemes, so they haven't been able to track the amount of installations quite as well, but they're trying. They've introduced a new register which is starting to track it. But let's say we've got 10%. I don't know, could be less than that. If all of those small batteries can be aggregated in real time through signaling, we've actually got the biggest power station in Australia. We've already got the biggest power station when it comes to generation on our roofs of our houses. We've got 12 gigawatts of solar on the roofs of our houses. That's the biggest power station in Australia. The biggest battery storage system might well be just the home systems that are all connected to a communication network and controlled through what's known as a VPP solution. So something that can turn them on and off to charge or discharge on demand. Now, you might say, oh, I don't want to lose the power in my battery because it's precious to me. Well, actually exporting a small amount of power at right time is what FCAS is all about. So it's not like discharging the whole of your battery. It might only be doing it for 10 minutes just to support the network during a bit of a dip, and you get a big financial incentive to do that. So that's VPP. So I think I've kind of touched on everything from the personal level through to what communities can do in terms of energy. And I think it's time for me to hand back to Jeff for the wrap. So over to you, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Once again, a great presentation and a lot of very interesting information. I hope that's been very helpful for our 3 visitors today for the program. I have put a question up in the chat, it's just a question that Dr. Morag Mackay would like you to answer in this chat function before you go today is this: what type of community energy projects interest you most from those Glen has presented and any others you're aware of? For example, the ones I might have spoken of earlier. So if you could put that in the chat function, if you do have any thoughts around that, we'll then provide the responses to Morag, and she will then know what your interests are, so she can elaborate on that a little bit further in her session next Saturday. But we look forward to having you back on Saturday. This session has been recorded by Tom, so he's going to edit it and make it available to us, and when it's ready, we will let you know. So the other thing was that Glen made available, and he's mentioned this a couple of times in his session, he made available a list of resources that you could utilize for self-directed study that's got quite a bit of information in it from the internet. And that was supposed to have been circulated to you by the staff at Pakenham, and I was assured that that did go. So can someone just put a thumb up if you received that resource? Great. So that's gone out to everyone. And if you happen not to have received it, just phone Pakenham Living and Learning on Monday, and they will send it out to you. So we've got 2 thumbs up from Rachel and John and Robin. Three thumbs. You've all got it. That's great. So yeah, I don't think there's anything more that I need to add at this point, apart from simply to say that although this session has been focused around a lot of technology, a lot of technical information, you don't actually need all of that information to run a community energy group. I come from a humanities background, and I know none of this scientific stuff. And when I started Healesville Core, I knew nothing about, or practically nothing about community renewable energy, apart from the fact that I had solar panels on my rooftop and evacuated tubes. So it's been a steep learning curve for me. And what we have done is we have endeavored to link up with people in the community who've got that technical knowledge, with companies that have got that knowledge who can provide it to our communities. And our final session for the series of seminars that we're running will be with Gerald Ahrens from Como Energy. And that's a small company that works with community energy groups to provide consultancy services to them to enable them to set up small systems within their local communities, such as in Healesville, where we've been working on a feasibility study for a solar car park in the east end of the town that also has a community battery attached to it that will provide excess energy to one of the businesses in the town, and we'll also have a number of EV chargers, trickle chargers and fast chargers. And we could never, ever have done that on our own because of the lack of technical expertise in our community, in our community energy group. But by working with our industry partners, we're able to do that and provide very sophisticated feasibility studies and business cases that would have been way beyond our capacity. So I just want to reassure you that if you do want to set up a community energy group, you don't need all of that technical knowledge. You just need to be creative, and with the partnerships that you set up with your local council, with providers in your local community, and with others around Australia. And Como Energy is not even in Victoria. Their directors live in New South Wales and in Brisbane, Sydney and in Brisbane. And we do all of our meetings online. All of their connections are online with other technical people. And in this modern age with the internet, all of that works really well. So just finally, again, a big thank you to Miriam at Pakenham Living and Learning and Mary at Emerald Community House for the ongoing support that they have both provided for this series that we're running, and for hosting the series. It's been great to be able to work with them. And this series of events that we are running at Pakenham and at Emerald is the last output from the Yarra Ranges Community Power Hub, the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub. And we hope that you have been able to enjoy that today, and will enjoy the others coming up. So I will end the session there. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Tom. Thank you all for attending, Rachel, Robin, and John. And we look forward to seeing you same time, same place, same URL at next Saturday at 10 a.m., 10 to 12. Goodbye for now.